I've played a lot of games this year that floored me, but these two almost give me whiplash from running the whole gamut. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach is a continuation of one of my favorite games of all time in the original Death Stranding, and then Donkey Kong Bananza is the culmination of years of waiting for a new 3D Donkey Kong game. For a long time, people have asked me, what would you like to see in this Nintendo Direct? And I've answered, a new 3D Donkey Kong is my dream. Well, sometimes dreams do come true. But what do these two games have to do with each other? Well, nothing. Well, basically nothing. Except for the fact that the player experience in both games is rewarding for the same reason. Player agency is paramount. Agency meaning we want the player to be able to use the tools we give them to solve problems and tackle challenges in ways that feel meaningful rather than rehearsed. Both of these games excel at this. Of course, it's exaggeration when you say, you can do anything you want in this game, but somehow it just feels true in both of these games. Why is that? I think it's because these developers prioritize creating cool tools that work the way you expect them to work, and then rarely box the player into using them a specific or certain way. There's an addictive, I can do anything in this game feeling, and it's not literal, at least in my experience. The more elements that they pack into a game, typically, the least baked in most of them feel. That feeling really comes from the guide rails just being removed completely when the tools have already been provided to you, and that really only happens when a developer is confident that their mechanics are nearly foolproof in function. In both Death Stranding and Donkey Kong, the tools all basically center around mobility. The developers of each game load us up with tools that we can use to traverse the world however we choose. In Death Stranding, it's ladders and vehicles and bridges and roads and climbing anchors and coffin-shaped hoverboards. In Donkey Kong, it's rolling and then jumping after you roll off a ledge, or maybe sculpting the terrain to play exactly how you want to, or changing your abilities with the Bananza transformations. Look, I'm not trying to say these games are anything alike. Well, a little bit I am, but the reasons I like each game are ultimately very similar. I get to play how I want to. And in Donkey Kong, I get to say, oh, banana, every 2 minutes. And my wife loves it, and me a little bit less every single time I do it. Death Stranding is an introspective game. There's a lot of downtime just walking. When people call it a walking simulator, I get it. That's basically what it is. You walk, and you travel, and you traverse, all in the name of just delivering packages from point A to point B. It's not really that simple, though. This lack of simplicity is the primary way that Kojima's game impresses you. It loads you up with tools, gives you simple goals, but adds in modifiers in the form of more challenging terrain, enemy encounters, time restrictions, etc. These modifiers are what prompt you to ask, what tools am I going to pull out of my tool belt this time? I have played a lot of Death Stranding 2. I'm still not finished yet, but I'm constantly imagining new ways to use the same tools. Occasionally, I'll even just remember a tool that got introduced 20 hours earlier and go, oh yeah, I should try that this time. This is the pinnacle example of giving the player agency to play however he or she wants to. Simple goals, evolving challenges, and an exciting tool belt. Donkey Kong does the same thing. The goal? Bananas. And whatever Pauline's after, but mostly bananas. This is another game with simple goals, evolving challenges, and an exciting tool belt. If Death Stranding is a walking simulator, and again, I believe it basically is a lot of the time, then Donkey Kong is a banana hoarding simulator, and that's okay. Games can be built a lot of ways. Many games have simple goals and exciting tool belts, but then the challenges are built specifically around tools from that tool belt. You could have a sweet moveset, that makes moving around the world exciting, and you could have some really good challenges that keep everything fresh, but then you could lack simple goals and end up with a game that kind of feels pointless after a handful of hours. Each of these games, however, avoids the cardinal sin of gaming, being boring, by equipping the player quickly with tools and techniques, almost so quickly that it's overwhelming. And in doing so, the player spends a considerable amount of time just familiarizing with the movesets before ever really being challenged at all. I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm about 20 hours into any game is when I start itching a little bit for more variety. This can either come from the game I'm playing or sometimes from another game that calls my name from the game shelf. I didn't have the itch to move on with either DK or Death Stranding though, because I always felt like the gameplay stayed fresh and fun. It didn't even matter that my goals were just delivering packages or hoarding bananas. It's fun to do those things. To me, Nintendo has historically had a great grasp on what makes games objectively fun. Its deep and tangled history as the king of platformers has definitely cemented that. In a good platformer, the challenge isn't, wow, this jump is harder than the others. It's really, wow, I have to think differently about how I'm going to approach this. That call to action for the player, followed up by a response that's rooted in player agency, is deeply satisfying. What amazes me about Death Stranding, then, is how it translates that design philosophy into exactly what everyone clowns on the game for. Hideo Kojima is just sitting at his studio saying something like, you're going to deliver packages, but there's ghosts kind of, and sometimes the water's high enough that you're maybe going to get knocked over and drop your packages, but the baby will be okay. And then Steve-san says, Kojima-san, what baby? And he goes into a 75-minute lore dump, and everybody leaves a little bit more confused than when they started. But all of this is critical Kojima core behavior that can create a game that is basically walking and still ends up being one of the coolest games I've ever played. This is because the medium isn't really all that important. The tools, the moveset, the techniques, those are the things that lead to that addictive feeling of triumph when you overcome a tricky new challenge. Nintendo, on the other hand, has the benefit of using an established character like Donkey Kong with a long and basically irrelevant at this point history. I don't know who the Kojima of Donkey Kong Bananza is, but let's just use Miyamoto as a stand-in. Miyamoto-san, what should our design philosophy be for this new 3D Donkey Kong game? Well, what do we know about Donkey Kong, Miyamoto might say? We know that he loves bananas. We know that he's very strong. He's a hero, but he's not quite like Mario, so let's use these ideas. Look, I know I'm simplifying this, and the teams who created both of these games were insanely imaginative, and they created games that clearly innovated in a bunch of ways, but the design philosophies lead to similar finished products. Now, let's venture in our minds to a different setting, a boardroom. Executives sit around a table pitching ideas. One might say, I heard Fortnite is popular again, we could just do that. Another pipes up to say, yeah, but what is it about that game that people like? A guy in the back of the room says, well, we know that game makes a ton of money, so whatever we greenlight has to have some kind of season pass or DLC element to it. What we're imagining here, which unfortunately might be more like reality than we want it to be, is not what engineers would describe as engineering from first principles, meaning you engineer unconventionally. You're not just taking good ideas and seeing how they fit into your game idea, but you're creating good ideas and then figuring out how they could serve the goals of your game. Nintendo and Kojima both first principled the heck out of these games. They said, here's the idea, here are the problems with it, and here are the tools that solve those problems. So one might say, yes, Miyamoto-san, DK loves the bananas, but how do we make the player love the bananas? Okay, maybe the conversation didn't go exactly like that, but it could have been more like, okay, look, we have running, we have rolling, we have jumping, and we have ground slapping. But with only these tools, the platforming gets stale when applied to a 3D platformer rather than a 2D platforming game like players are used to with Donkey Kong. So this problem demands a solution. So developers create new features that make sense. Eventually, you end up with all of the fun traversal techniques that make Bananza so excellent, as well as all of the destructible environments that make it such a breath of fresh air. Likewise, Death Stranding has simple goals. Depending how esoteric you want to get with it, these goals could either be described as delivering packages or advancing the story. Kojima would probably say something like, the goal of the game is reconnecting the world via the chiral network, but tomato tomato. It's absolutely crazy to me how effective roads and bridges and ladders and ropes are at making walking a compelling medium for a 60-plus hour game. I'm fully convinced that Kojima mostly just has a story he wants to tell with a bunch of A and B list Hollywood actors, and everything else is kind of secondary to that. But this is a guy that knows how to make gameplay satisfying too. Both of these games are masterclasses in entertainment. I suspect both of them could be acquired tastes, one maybe a little more than the other, but these are very unique games. One thing's for certain, though, the last 8 years since Breath of the Wild came out... Hold on, wait. 8 freaking years? Sorry. The last 8 years since Breath of the Wild have been really, really good to our shared hobby. There's a lot of newness, even for games that pick up in a long lineage of great games like Donkey Kong Bananza, and also for games that are basically just the same game a second time around like Death Stranding 2. Whether it's due to these studios being primarily driven by people who love the medium first and the money kind of being secondary to that, or maybe indie games blazing the way for new advancements in player agency, or maybe even just old blood and new blood mixing together in these development studios, we're the ones that get to benefit. And the future still looks and feels bright, even though there's a lot of bad news in the industry lately. Great games really aren't all that rare, and thank God for that. What do you think about these games? Have you picked out a game of the year for 2025 yet? Does player agency impact how much you enjoy your games? Tell me all that and more down in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.